Sometimes a life breaks long before a heart understands the sound of its own shattering. And sometimes a child steps into her destiny without realizing she is walking into the hands of a storm. For Amina, the day they took her away did not feel like loss yet. It felt like a question the world had not finished answering. Only later would she understand that this was the moment her innocence began to loosen its grip, quietly slipping from her small hands like a forgotten cloth in the wind. The morning light had been deceptively soft, resting gently on the thatched roofs of her village, warming the earth where she and her siblings had played barefoot. Nothing in the sky warned her of the shift that was coming. Her mother's voice, usually steady even in hardship, trembled as she wrapped Amina's only cloth around her shoulders. Her father stood by the doorway, eyes lowered, carrying the weight of a man who had run out of choices. Their home, small, cracked, familiar, suddenly felt like a memory being folded away before her very eyes. Yet Amina did not cry. Something in her young mind still believed she was coming back by evening, that the journey was simply a strange errand she would understand later. Children often mistake sorrow for confusion, and that morning, confusion held her like a gentle hand. As they walked toward the waiting car, the village seemed quieter than usual, as though the earth itself sensed a story shifting. Neighbors stood silently, their eyes heavy with the knowledge of a life Amina was too young to interpret. They knew the weight of poverty. They knew what happened when a family ran out of rope. They knew the difference between a child leaving for opportunity and a child being handed to fate. But Amina, only 12 and still dreaming of a future where she would one day become a teacher, felt only the strange excitement of seeing a big car so close. It was her mother's shaking hands, not her own instincts, that whispered the truth she could not yet hear. When the car door closed beside her, the sound felt final, like a chapter sealed. Through the dusty window, she watched her mother's face shrinking into the distance, watched her siblings running toward the road with small, frightened steps, watched everything she understood about the world fade into a horizon she could no longer reach. There was no turning back, only the echo of her mother's last embrace warming her like a fragile shield. The wealthy house appeared like something carved from another world. Tall walls, polished floors, the kind of silence that spoke of power rather than peace. Amina stepped inside with hesitant awe, expecting warmth but finding only structure, expectations, and a coldness that lived in the air, like invisible smoke. Every adult in the mansion moved with a purpose she did not understand, their eyes glancing at her not with curiosity, but with calculation. She was introduced to her duties in clipped sentences, each instruction delivered with a precision that left no room for childhood. There would be no questions, no wandering, no mistakes. Her life here would run on rules, not rhythms. Still, she tried to carry her mother's love inside her like a lantern. She told herself that maybe this sacrifice would feed her siblings. Maybe her mother would finally rest without fear of hunger. Maybe one day she would return home carrying stories of triumph. Yet beneath these fragile hopes, another feeling crept quietly, an unease she could not name. Something in the mansion's silence felt too heavy, as though the walls were holding secrets she wasn't meant to understand. The way people paused mid-sentence when she entered a room, the odd echoes that lingered in certain corridors, the strange hush that fell whenever the master of the house approached. Each small detail pressed against her spirit, like a warning wrapped in velvet. But Amina, still clinging to her belief in goodness, pushed the unease aside. She was determined to endure, to make her family's sacrifice worth something. She did not know that sometimes endurance leads a soul deeper into shadows than innocence can survive. She did not yet see the subtle cracks forming beneath the mansion's beauty, cracks that would soon widen into truths sharp enough to change the shape of her destiny. And on her first night, as she lay awake, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of a house too perfect to trust, she sensed a presence lingering just beyond the door, silent, deliberate, watching. She did not know its name, but she felt its eyes. She did not move. She only listened, unaware that this quiet moment was the beginning of the storm that had been waiting for her. Some wounds do not scream when they open. They whisper, tightening slowly around the heart until the world begins to sound like a place where kindness has forgotten your name. And sometimes the first cruelty a child tastes is not delivered by enemies, but by those who laugh as though your pain is part of the morning weather. For Amina, the day mockery became her daily companion was the day she realized that silence, too, could bruise. From the very first dawn she spent in the mansion, Amina sensed that the walls carried their own kind of memory, polished, cold, and indifferent. But it was the children of the household who gave that memory a voice, stitching it into the mornings with laughter that felt too sharp for such young mouths. They circled her like curious birds, picking apart her accent as though it were a mistake she had birthed intentionally, repeating her words with exaggerated tones that made her stomach twist. Her way of tying her wrapper fascinated them not with respect, but with ridicule. They tugged at the edges, pointed at its faded colors, and treated her entire identity as a costume worn for their amusement, rather than the fabric of a life crafted in hardship. Amina learned quickly that privilege did not always grow with grace. These were children accustomed to polished shoes, warm food, and a world where their voices were echoes of their parents' confidence. They saw themselves as the sun in every room, and she, the unnoticed shadow at the corner. They never needed a reason to mock her. Their entitlement was reason enough. And though she tried to move quietly, hoping invisibility would protect her, their laughter followed her from room to room, threading itself into the rhythm of her chores until even the simplest tasks felt heavier than they should. The servants, older and wrapped in years of their own submission, offered no refuge from this quiet storm. Their whispers drifted through the hallways like smoke from an unseen fire, soft, curling, impossible to avoid. They spoke of her background with tones that suggested pity, disguised as superiority. They predicted her future with the weariness of people who had long stopped believing in their own. "She will scrub floors forever," they murmured. "This house will shape her the way it has shaped us." Their voices carried no malice, but their resignation felt just as suffocating. It was as if the mansion itself had a script written for every servant who crossed its threshold, and Amina was expected to follow it without question. Yet Amina did not crumble. She swayed. Yes, humiliation has a way of bending even the strongest spirits. But she did not break. Each laugh she endured, each whisper she swallowed, shaped her in ways no one could see. She learned to hold her chin steady even when her chest burned. She learned to move with purpose even when her hands trembled. She learned that silence, when chosen, could become a shield sharper than any weapon. And beneath that silence, something powerful began to form. Not defiance, not rebellion, but a determination carved from the same earth that had raised her. Every corridor, every room, every passing conversation became part of a larger lesson she crafted quietly for herself. She memorized the layout of the mansion, the daily rhythms of the household, the subtle shifts of authority that determined who spoke and who listened. She observed the servants closely, learning their patterns, their strengths, their mistakes, the unspoken hierarchy they followed. She noticed how decisions traveled from the master's study to the kitchen, how tension moved like air pressure before a storm, how the smallest change in tone could reshape an entire day. She absorbed the world around her with the attention of someone who understood that knowledge could one day become her only escape. But the mockery still pierced her in ways she could not admit. There were nights when she lay awake in her small storage room, feeling the sting of the day replaying itself in her mind. Echoes of laughter, the heaviness of unspoken pain, the weight of being seen as less than human. Yet even in those moments, she reminded herself of her mother's trembling embrace, of her father's quiet hope, of her siblings' wide eyes waiting for the future she had been sent to build. These memories steadied her, grounding her like roots in a storm. And as the days formed a pattern of predictable cruelty, Amina felt something shifting inside her. Not a breaking, but a tightening, a gathering of strength waiting for a moment to unfold. She knew that silence could not protect her forever, and endurance had its limits. The whispers were growing sharper. The laughter was growing bolder. The mansion itself seemed to be pushing her toward a moment she could not yet see. But fate, patient and precise, was moving quietly toward her, step by step, breath by breath, waiting for the exact instant when her endurance would meet its first true test. And one morning, as she bent to pick up a tray she had dropped in her trembling haste, she heard a sound behind her. A voice, low and unfamiliar, speaking her name in a tone that did not belong to mockery. She froze, breath held, heart trembling, sensing that this single moment could become the crack in the silence she had carried for so long. Some endings do not crash like thunder. They arrive softly, slipping into a life with the gentleness of a final breath, yet carrying the power to erase everything a heart once relied on. And sometimes, the most painful betrayals are not delivered by enemies, but by the very hands that once claimed to offer you safety. For Amina, the moment she was cast out began not with shouting, but with a quiet accusation that stole the ground from beneath her feet. The day it happened, the air in the mansion felt unusually tense, as though something unspoken had been waiting for the exact moment to reveal its sharp edge. A piece of jewelry had gone missing, a bracelet the madame treasured, a symbol of her status, a delicate thing with enough value to end a future. Amina had not even been near the room where it was last seen, but in a house where power chose its victims and fear shaped the truth, innocence was too fragile to stand unprotected. She was summoned to the sitting room, her hands trembling, her heart pounding with the quiet terror of a child who senses she is walking into a storm without shelter. The madame's voice was cold, slicing through the room with the precision of someone who had already decided the outcome long before the conversation began. The children stood behind her, their faces twisted with a mix of curiosity and false righteousness, as though watching her punishment added excitement to their day. The servants gathered too, not out of concern, but because a spectacle gave them temporary relief from their own buried grievances. No one asked Amina to explain. No one gave her a moment to breathe. The accusation came swiftly, and the judgment came even faster. She felt the ground shift as the words landed. "You stole it." There was no question, only a sentence. Amina tried to speak, her voice trembling with desperation so raw it tasted like metal in her mouth. She tried to explain where she had been, what she had done, how she had never touched anything she had not been permitted to touch. But the more she spoke, the more invisible she felt. Her words dissolved into the air, dismissed as the desperate rambling of someone who, in their eyes, had no right to be believed. The truth was not her ally. The truth lived in the pockets of those who held authority, and that authority had already turned its back on her. Within minutes, her few belongings, folded clothes, a frayed wrapper, a small piece of soap, were shoved into a plastic bag. The speed of the decision stunned her, carving a hollow ache deep beneath her ribs. She had lived under this roof, served with everything she had, endured mockery, swallowed humiliation, and carried hope like a fragile promise. And yet, here she was, discarded like worn-out cloth, her worth reduced to a single false accusation. They pushed her through the gate without a moment of hesitation. The sun was setting, washing the road in reddish gold, but there was no warmth in its glow for her. She stood there, holding the flimsy bag to her chest, the gate closing behind her with a finality that echoed louder than any slap could have. The road stretched before her, empty, silent, unforgiving. For the first time since leaving her village, she felt utterly alone, not the quiet loneliness of missing home, but the sharp, suffocating loneliness of being unwanted by the world she had tried so hard to serve. Her dignity felt bruised, her future blurred, her trust shattered. She imagined her mother's face, the hope in her father's eyes, the expectations of her siblings, and the weight of all those dreams pressed against her chest until she could barely breathe. She wanted to collapse. She wanted to disappear. She wanted to erase the moment entirely. But beneath the despair, beneath the exhaustion, beneath the humiliation, something small and bright refused to fade. It was not anger. It was not pride. It was a quiet ember, an ember of defiance, the stubborn will that had been growing inside her since the first day she had stepped into that mansion. It flickered now, weak but alive, whispering to her that being thrown away was not the end. It was the beginning of a path she had not yet learned to walk. She stood there for a long time, letting the silence settle around her, grounding herself in the truth that she was still breathing, still standing, still capable of rising. She did not know where to go. She did not know whom to trust, but she knew she would not break. Not here. Not tonight. Then, as the sky deepened into early dusk, she heard footsteps approaching from behind. Not hurried, not hostile, but deliberate, as though someone had been watching her from a distance, waiting for the right moment to step forward. She turned slowly, her breath caught at the edge of fear and hope, uncertain whether this figure was fate offering her a hand or another blow waiting to land. And as the silhouette emerged into the fading light, she wondered who would dare to step into her path when she had nothing left to lose, and no one left to trust. There are moments in life when hope does not arrive in grand gestures or blazing miracles. It comes quietly, wrapped in ordinary skin, stepping into your shattered world with the softness of a hand that has known its own share of breaking. And sometimes, the kindness that saves a soul does not roar. It whispers into the wounds that life has tried so hard to silence. For Amina, the unexpected warmth that found her began with the simple voice of a stranger who saw a lost child where others saw nothing at all. She had been walking for hours, her feet blistered, her heart aching with the weight of a future she could not yet imagine. The sky had shifted from gold to gray, and the quiet road stretched endlessly ahead when her body finally gave in to exhaustion. She paused near the edge of a crowded marketplace, her bag slipping from her trembling fingers as she sat on a broken crate, invisible in the rush of evening trade. Vendors shouted prices. Children chased each other between stalls. The air buzzed with the scent of spices and roasted groundnuts. Yet Amina felt detached from it all, as though she were watching life through a window she could not open. She was numb, hollow, drifting between fear and despair, when a soft voice broke through the fog. "My child, why do your eyes look like rain that has forgotten how to fall?" The voice belonged to an elderly woman, wrapped in a simple wrapper and faded headscarf. Her stall was small, crowded with vegetables and dried goods, nothing that spoke of wealth or privilege. Yet the moment Amina met her eyes, she felt a warmth she had not felt in years, a warmth that did not demand anything, did not judge, did not carry the coldness she had been breathing in the mansion. The woman studied her quietly, her gaze steady, filled with the kind of understanding born only from a life that had walked through storms and survived them. Without asking for explanations, without pressing for details Amina could not yet give, the woman held out her hand. "Come," she said gently, guiding her into the stall as though leading her into a small sanctuary, carved between chaos and humanity. She offered her a wooden stool, the kind worn smooth by years of use, and placed a warm bowl of food before her. The aroma alone made Amina's eyes sting. She had not eaten since morning, yet the gesture itself felt fuller than the food. It felt like a balm placed on a wound she had long believed would never heal. Amina wanted to refuse out of instinct, out of the fear that had been shaped by years of being treated as less than human. but hunger and gratitude pushed the words away. She ate slowly, each bite grounding her, steadying her breath, reminding her that she was still alive. The woman said nothing as she ate, only watched with quiet tenderness, as though trying to measure how much sorrow the girl carried in her small frame. When Amina finished, the woman offered water and motioned for her to rest on a folded cloth near the stall's back wall. The moments of silence that passed between them were not heavy. They felt like permission to breathe, perhaps for the first time since childhood. When the woman finally spoke, her voice was soft, steady, almost motherly. "You do not have to tell me everything today. Pain speaks when it is ready." She touched Amina's hand lightly, her palm rough from years of labor, yet her touch carried more comfort than any embrace Amina had received in the mansion. "But you are safe here. For now. Rest." Amina felt something inside her loosen. A tension she had carried for so long, she no longer recognized it as a burden. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the noise of the market fade into the background. She remembered her mother's gentle voice, the warmth of home, the dreams she once had before life reshaped them with cruelty. For the first time in years, she felt seen, not as a servant, not as a mistake, not as an inconvenience, but as a human being with worth beyond what she could perform. As the market slowly emptied for the evening, the woman lit a small lantern, its glow casting soft shadows across the stall. Amina watched her move with slow, deliberate grace, arranging the goods for the next day, humming an old folk song that stirred memories Amina didn't even know she still had. There was something about this woman, something steady, grounded, unshaken, that made Amina feel as though fate had placed her here with intention. She had no idea who this woman truly was. She did not know what story lay behind her calm eyes, or what losses had shaped her into someone capable of offering such effortless care. But she sensed, deep within her trembling heart, that this encounter was not a coincidence. It was the beginning of something new, something unexpected, something life-altering. And somewhere beneath her lingering fear, a fragile seed of hope began to take root. As the lantern flickered and the woman turned to her with a look that carried more meaning than words, Amina sensed that this stranger held more than just kindness. She held a door waiting to open. But what hidden opportunity in this woman's life was about to ignite the transformation Amina never saw coming? Some lessons do not arrive in classrooms or under the watchful eyes of teachers. They slip into a life the way stolen sunlight enters a darkened room, slowly, gently, yet powerful enough to change what the soul believes is possible. And sometimes learning does not feel like education at all. It feels like awakening, like a forgotten fire being coaxed back to life. For Amina, knowledge became the quiet weapon she never knew she was allowed to wield. The elderly market woman, Mama Sada, became more than a rescuer. She became a guide whose wisdom was shaped not from books, but from survival, instinct, and decades of understanding how the world moved beneath its polished surface. Each morning, after arranging vegetables and grains beneath the shade of her small stall, she allowed Amina to sit beside her, not as an assistant, not as a burden, but as a student whose curiosity deserved space to breathe. "The market teaches those who listen," Mama Saad often said, and Amina listened with the hunger of someone who had been starved not only of food, but of opportunity. She learned the art of trading first, watching how Mama Saad's hands moved with confidence, how her voice shifted depending on the customer, how she selected moments of firmness and moments of gentleness. Negotiation, Amina discovered, was not simply about price. It was about reading eyes, understanding hesitations, catching the flicker of doubt or desire that crossed a buyer's expression. She began to see patterns: who hesitated before paying, who returned expecting familiarity, who tried to take advantage of kindness. Mama Saad taught her the power of patience, the language of silence, and the strength of knowing when to speak. "People reveal themselves," she said one afternoon, "but only to those who are watching." Amina watched. She watched everything. Every interaction became a lesson. Every conversation a small window into a world she had once believed was closed to her. And as days turned into weeks, she felt something stirring deep within her. A confidence she had forgotten. A sense of purpose she never knew she could claim. But learning did not stop at the stall. When work slowed or customers wandered away, Amina's eyes drifted toward the small pile of old magazines Mama Sadda kept beneath her table, remnants of newspapers and booklets people discarded without thought. At first, Amina flipped through them out of curiosity, her fingers tracing unfamiliar words, her mind struggling to connect meanings she had once learned in school, but had lost through years of hardship. Mama Said noticed her interest without comment, allowing the girl to explore at her own pace. And soon Amina became obsessed. Every night, after the market closed and the stall was packed away, she returned to the tiny room Mama Saad offered her, a humble corner, but warmer than any space she had ever known in the mansion. There, by the faint glow of a lantern, she studied the worn pages, whispering words to herself, sounding them out, piecing together sentences like a puzzle waiting to reveal a long-hidden picture. She read about places she had never seen, about inventions and ideas that stretched far beyond the limits of her world, about people who had risen from nothing and carved their names into history. Each page widened her perspective, lifting her from the narrow path of survival into a broader understanding of what life could be. Knowledge gave her a new language, not just of words, but of thought. She began to understand that strength was not only the ability to endure, it was the ability to decipher the world, to anticipate it, to shape it. She learned how markets influenced one another, how seasons dictated prices, how trust could be built or broken with a single gesture. She studied human behavior with the precision of someone who had lived on the receiving end of cruelty, and now sought to understand its origins. And in the midst of it all, Amina discovered something else. She was smart, not in the way the mansion children measured intelligence, but in the way life itself recognized wisdom. She felt a quiet pride growing in her chest, a pride that did not shout, but glowed steadily like a coal waiting for breath. And with it came a realization she had never dared articulate. Understanding the world was not just a path toward survival. It was her first step toward reshaping her destiny. Mama Saad saw the shift before Amina herself did. One afternoon, after Amina skillfully handled a difficult customer, the woman smiled with a knowing softness. "You are not meant to remain small," she murmured, her voice almost carried away by the wind. "Your mind is beginning to stretch beyond this place." Amina froze, the words settling into her spirit with both warmth and fear. She had always believed life was something that happened to her, not something she could build. But suddenly, she saw possibility, not as a distant dream, but as a door she was slowly learning to unlock. Yet even as confidence blossomed within her, one question lingered like a shadow at the edge of her newfound hope. What could she truly become with this knowledge? And one evening, while turning the brittle pages of a forgotten magazine, she stumbled upon a single idea that stopped her breath and rewrote the boundaries of her imagination. An understanding so powerful, it made her realize she could build a life far beyond mere survival, if only she had the courage to reach for it. There are moments when the world tests a soul not to destroy it, but to reveal the steel quietly forming beneath the wounds. And sometimes, life throws its hardest blows just when hope begins to bloom, as if demanding proof that the dream growing inside you is strong enough to survive. For Amina, the setback that arrived next did not land on the frightened girl she once was. It struck the woman she was becoming, a woman learning to rise from places meant to break her. Her progress with Mama Saad had been slow but steady, each day shaping her into someone more confident, more aware, more capable. But life, with its unpredictable rhythm, rarely allowed victory to go uninterrupted. One morning, as they unpacked their goods to set up the stall, they discovered that half of the stock had spoiled overnight. Vegetables wilted, grains infested, and a bag of dried peppers ruined by moisture from unexpected rain. It was not just loss. It was a financial blow, sharp enough to threaten everything they had been building. Mama Sadde, though graceful in the face of hardship, could not hide the quiet despair in her eyes. She had weathered storms before, but this one cut too close, coming at a time when their savings were already thin. Amina felt the weight of the disaster settle heavily on her chest, not because she feared returning to struggle, but because she understood what this meant for the woman who had saved her. The market was unforgiving, and a single setback could drown even the strongest traders. For a moment, fear tried to crawl its way back into Amina's spirit, whispering old doubts, old memories of being powerless. But she inhaled slowly, steadying herself. She had survived worse than this. She had been shaped by loss, sharpened by cruelty, tempered by endurance, and she refused to let hardship dictate her future again. Instead of collapsing, she began studying the situation with a quiet intensity that surprised even Mama Saad. "We cannot undo what is gone," she said softly, "but we can learn what it came to teach." She spread the spoiled items before her, examining them like a strategist analyzing a battlefield. Why had the vegetables spoiled so quickly? How had the moisture reached the dried peppers? What mistakes had been made in storage? What patterns had she missed? She observed every detail, her mind working with the precision of someone who had spent months reading people, timing, prices, and movement. And in that moment, something inside her shifted. She realized that hardship was not an enemy. It was information. Pain was data. Loss was a lesson. Every failure was a map pointing toward a better version of herself. The mansion had tried to silence her. Poverty had tried to cage her. But here, facing a setback large enough to shake their fragile stability, she did not feel fear. She felt clarity. With this clarity came innovation. While analyzing their losses, memories began to surface. Memories of her village, of the items the women crafted during festivals, of the simple beauty people created with their hands when money was scarce, but imagination flourished. She remembered woven bracelets made from colored threads, small decorative gourds painted with symbols, tiny dolls crafted from leftover cloth, and scented shea butter mixtures her mother sold during harvest season. These were items that required more time than money, more creativity than resources, items that could be made from scraps, salvaged materials, and the quiet artistry of traditional life. An idea blossomed. She began creating small handcrafted pieces in the evenings, bracelets, beaded anklets, tiny cloth pouches stitched with patterns inspired by her childhood, and decorative tokens shaped by memories of both the village she came from and the city she now navigated. These items carried stories, stories of survival, resilience, harmony between past and present. And in a world hungry for authenticity, her creations quickly caught attention. Customers began to pause at the stall, not only for produce, but for the handmade treasures displayed with humble pride on a wooden tray. Some bought out of curiosity, others out of admiration, others because they felt the soul woven into each piece. Her resilience became a force so steady it had its own gravity. It pulled opportunities toward her. It shaped her identity. It whispered to the universe that she was not here merely to endure. She was here to rise. And rise she did, slowly but unmistakably, each handcrafted item becoming a stepping stone toward a future she no longer feared to imagine. Yet Amina remained unaware of one thing. She was being watched, not by someone hostile, not by someone seeking to take advantage, but by someone who saw the spark in her, the determination in her eyes, the intelligence in her methods, the creativity in her products, and recognized potential far greater than the market stall could contain. And as she arranged her handcrafted items one bright morning, unaware of the gaze fixed upon her from across the crowd, She felt a strange shiver, an intuition that her path was about to shift again, shaped by someone who had been silently observing her growth, waiting for the perfect moment to step forward and change her life forever. Some people see the world through ordinary eyes, taking from it only what stands on the surface, but a rare few look deeper, past the dust, past the silence, past the scars, and recognize greatness long before it has the courage to introduce itself. And sometimes, fate sends such eyes at the exact moment a soul is ready to rise. For Amina, the stranger who stepped into her path, did not see a market girl or a struggling apprentice. He saw a crown she did not yet believe belonged to her. The man first appeared at the market on a quiet afternoon, when the sun hung low, casting golden shadows across the stalls. He wore simple clothes, nothing flashy, nothing demanding attention. Yet there was a posture about him, a quiet authority, a steady confidence that made people clear space without being asked. Amina was busy arranging her handcrafted items when she noticed him standing across the way, observing her with an intensity that felt neither invasive nor random. At first, she assumed he was just another customer, but when he approached, his questions revealed something else entirely. "How long have you been running this setup?" he asked, not looking at the beaded bracelets, but at her hands, her arrangement, the system she had built without formal training. His eyes lingered on the organization of her goods, the strategies she used to draw attention, the way customers gravitated toward her stall despite the competition. His curiosity was not that of a buyer. It was the curiosity of someone who recognized the fine threads of potential woven into everything she touched. Amina answered cautiously, uncertain why a stranger cared about her methods. But the more she spoke, the more fascinated he became, and soon his questions transformed from casual to analytical. He asked about her pricing, her inventory system, her supply chain, her decision-making process. She responded with a mix of instinct and learned discipline, explaining what Mama Sadi had taught her and what she had discovered on her own. The man listened with the sharpness of someone who understood business deeply, nodding thoughtfully, as though each word confirmed something he had long suspected. Finally, he introduced himself as Ibrahim Danladi, a respected entrepreneur known across the region, though Amina had never heard his name before. He ran successful ventures in different cities, employing dozens, mentoring many, building structures that had lifted entire communities. His gaze held no arrogance, only recognition. "You have something rare," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "You see systems naturally, just like those who lead." Amina felt her breath falter. No one had ever spoken such words to her. Not even in her dreams had she imagined someone would look at her, a girl thrown out of a mansion, a girl who had once been mocked for her accent and background, and see leadership. Ibrahim began visiting the stall regularly, not with grand gestures, but with purposeful presence. He taught her business frameworks drawn from his own experience, how to scale products, how to retain customers, how to diversify income without losing identity. He explained the mathematics of pricing, the psychology of marketing, and the discipline required to sustain long-term success. He shared how great businesses rose not by luck, but by strategy, patience, and clarity of purpose. Amina listened with the hunger of someone who understood that knowledge was no longer simply a tool for survival. It was the backbone of the life she intended to build. She asked questions, took notes, tested ideas, refined methods, and pushed herself with a determination that sometimes startled even Ibrahim. Her mind absorbed concepts swiftly, her instincts sharpened with each lesson, and her confidence began to unfold in ways that transformed her entire presence, not loudly, not boastfully, but with the quiet maturity of someone stepping fully into themselves. In time, her vision began forming, no longer a vague dream shaped by desperation, but a clear, deliberate plan shaped by understanding. She saw a future where her handcrafted items became more than market goods. She saw a business that celebrated cultural memory, empowered others, and created spaces where stories and artistry lived side by side. But this vision grew not from fantasy, but from strategy, and Ibrahim saw the shift even before she did. One afternoon, after explaining a concept about scaling production, Ibrahim leaned back, studying her with a proud but contemplative expression. "Amina," he said softly, "your mind is moving faster than your hands can keep up. Something is forming in you. Something big." He was right. Something was forming. Yet even he did not know what direction her mind would take next. For while Amina appreciated his mentorship, she had begun to think beyond the confines of even his teachings. She was crafting an idea neither of them had named yet, an idea born from her past, her struggles, her observations, and the quiet fire that had survived everything, meant to extinguish it. And one night, as she sketched her thoughts beneath the dim glow of a lantern, a bold concept crystallized, so daring, so unexpected, that even Ibrahim, with all his experience, would not foresee the brilliance she was about to unveil. Every great empire begins not with applause, but with a fragile whisper that refuses to disappear, even when the world tries to silence it. And sometimes the most powerful dream is the one born from wounds, shaped by survival, and carried by a heart that has learned to rise from ashes. For Amina, the first word of her dream did not thunder. It breathed, steady and persistent, determined to be heard. The idea had been growing inside her quietly for months, forming slowly through every lesson Ibrahim taught and every observation she gathered from the market. It had roots in her past, branches in her present, and a destiny reaching toward a future she had not yet dared to imagine. One evening, as she sat in her small room with the lantern flickering against the wall, she finally allowed the dream to speak its first full sentence. She would build a business that restored dignity, not for herself alone, but for women like her, women forgotten by society, silenced by poverty, overlooked by opportunity. Her vision was simple in its heart, yet revolutionary in its structure. She wanted to merge the craftsmanship of her village, the woven bracelets, decorated gourds, hand-dyed cloths, with the strategic precision of modern business. She wanted to empower women who possessed incredible skill but lacked platforms, resources, or guidance. She wanted to build a system where tradition met innovation, where culture met commerce, where dignity met opportunity. And she wanted to prove that greatness did not belong only to the wealthy. It belonged to the willing. She began designing the model with fierce determination, filling notebooks with sketches, diagrams, and notes Ibrahim would never have guessed she had the ability to articulate. She outlined supply chains using community networks, pricing models based on fairness instead of exploitation, and marketing strategies that honored authenticity rather than drowning it beneath trends. She built operational frameworks with the same discipline she had learned from the market, anticipating risks, preparing contingencies, mapping pathways that balanced growth with responsibility. Night after night, she refined her vision. And with each adjustment, her confidence grew. She no longer felt like the servant child thrown out of a mansion. She no longer felt like the lost girl wandering the marketplace. She felt like a woman rising into the fullness of her purpose, quietly, boldly, with the kind of clarity only hardship could forge. But reality, as always, tested her. Ibrahim encouraged her to meet small investors, hoping they might see the brilliance of her vision. Yet each attempt ended in disappointment. They listened politely at first, studying the model with the cold eyes of those trained to measure worth only by background. Some questioned her education, others doubted her leadership potential. A few dismissed her entirely the moment they recognized her accent or her modest clothes. One even said, "It is a beautiful idea, but people like you do not run businesses." Each rejection hit her like a quiet blow, sharp enough to bruise, but not enough to destroy. She had endured worse from the mansion. She had survived deeper sorrow, And every time the investors turned her away, something unexpected happened inside her dream. It grew louder, clearer, stronger. Each dismissal became a reason to refine, to improve, to push harder. She no longer saw rejection as a barrier. She saw it as confirmation that she was aiming beyond the limits others believed possible. There were nights when exhaustion wrapped around her like a cold blanket, when fear whispered that she was reaching too far, when doubt pressed against her ribs until breathing felt heavy. But she always returned to her notebooks, to her sketches, to her vision. She remembered the women in her village who worked tirelessly, unseen and undervalued. She remembered Mama Saad's steady wisdom. She remembered her younger self, standing alone at the gate of the mansion with nothing but wounded dignity. She remembered every voice that told her she would remain small, and she refused to let them be right. Slowly, word of her determination spread within the market. Traders whispered about the young girl designing big ideas. Customers noticed her handcrafted items evolving with sharper branding and richer meaning. A few local shop owners invited her to speak with them informally. She began to understand that sometimes opportunity does not arrive from the top. It grows from the ground, nurtured by those who see value where others see nothing. Yet even with these small steps forward, one truth remained. She needed someone who truly understood the magnitude of her vision. Someone who saw not just potential, but purpose. Someone who could look past her past and recognize the brilliance she was shaping with her own two hands. And fate, watching quietly, was preparing to open such a door. Because hidden among the people who observed her efforts, among the customers, the traders, the silent watchers, was someone who saw the spark she carried. Someone who had been studying her growth not with doubt, but with admiration. Someone whose influence could lift her dream beyond the market, beyond the village, beyond every barrier she had ever known. And one afternoon, as she presented her idea to yet another uninterested investor, she felt a steady gaze settle on her from across the room, a gaze filled not with doubt, but recognition. She did not yet know who this person was, but she sensed instantly that she was standing at the edge of the turning point her dream had been waiting for. Courage does not always roar across a crowded room. Sometimes it emerges quietly, in a trembling breath, choosing to rise when silence would feel safer. And often, the most powerful moment in a person's life is not when the world applauds them, but when they speak while their hands shake, their heart trembles, and their past threatens to pull them back into shadows. For Amina, the day her voice finally stood upright was the day her destiny stepped into the open. The local business forum was held in a modest town hall, nothing luxurious, nothing intimidating, but large enough to gather traders, small venture owners, local investors, and those who came out of curiosity rather than purpose. Amina stood at the back at first, notebook pressed against her chest, feeling the familiar weight of uncertainty whisper through her. She had rehearsed her presentation dozens of times, practicing in the quiet of her small room, testing her words against the dim lantern light. She had envisioned herself speaking with steady confidence, but now, facing real eyes, real expectations, and real possibility, fear tugged at her again, softly but insistently. Ibrahim stood beside her, calm, collected, offering a reassuring nod. "You are ready," he whispered. "Let your idea speak for itself." But even his confidence could not drown out the echo of her old insecurities, the mansion's laughter, the investors' dismissive comments, the quiet whispers that had once tried to shrink her to nothing. She inhaled slowly, grounding herself in everything she had survived. And when her name was called, she stepped forward, not with bold strides, but with a quiet determination that drew the room's attention before she said a word. The moment she reached the front, an unexpected stillness settled across the hall. She could feel dozens of eyes on her, some curious, some skeptical, some openly doubtful. A few recognized her from the market and exchanged puzzled glances, uncertain why a simple stall girl stood on a stage meant for entrepreneurs. But Amina did not let their perceptions dictate her confidence. She placed her notes on the podium, lifted her chin, and began. Her voice trembled lightly at first, but her words were clear, shaping themselves with a calm precision born from months of study, observation, and self-refinement. She explained her vision, a business rooted in dignity and fairness, built to uplift forgotten women, crafted from the intersection of cultural tradition and modern strategy. She spoke of supply chains built on community strength, product authenticity drawn from heritage, and marketing grounded not in imitation, but in truth. She laid out cost models, projected growth, sustainability options, and long-term empowerment plans with the clarity of someone who had dissected every corner of the idea and stitched it back together with purpose. And then, something remarkable happened. The room, once restless, half distracted, half dismissive, grew quiet. Not the uncomfortable quiet of doubt, but the attentive quiet of minds shifting, perceptions recalibrating. Her voice steadied, strengthened, sharpened. Her fear dissolved into focus. She no longer saw the audience as people who might reject her. She saw them as witnesses to a dream stepping into the world for the first time. When she finished, there was a long, thick silence. A silence that felt like the world pulling in a breath before something important happened. Then a single pair of hands began to clap. Slow, deliberate, grounded in genuine respect. The sound expanded as others joined, spreading through the hall with the unmistakable rhythm of admiration. And from the middle row, a man in a tailored but humble suit stood and stepped forward. His presence carried weight. Not the weight of intimidation, but the weight of someone accustomed to creating change. He approached her with a steady gaze, eyes bright with conviction. "Your idea," he said softly, "is not just business. It is a movement waiting to happen, and I would like to be part of it." He was a major investor, one Amina had never dared hope would listen, let alone believe. Yet here he was, offering a hand she had once been told she would never deserve. In that moment, she felt something shift inside her. Not pride, not triumph, but a profound sense of alignment. Her journey, once carved by survival, was now anchored in building, growing, leading. She was no longer simply rising from the ruins of her past. She was constructing something powerful enough to outlive her pain. But every rise draws its own shadows. Because where vision grows, competition awakens. Where success begins, scrutiny follows. And where a young woman steps boldly into power, the world often tests her with storms meant to shake her foundations and measure her resolve. And as she left the hall, hope glowing like a lantern in her chest, a message awaited her, one she did not expect, one that hinted at trouble brewing in the corners of her life she believed she had left behind. A storm was gathering, and its first rumble echoed her name. Success earned through ease is sweet, yes, but success forged from silence, humiliation, and swallowed pain carries a taste so deep it becomes memory, an ache, a triumph, a quiet roar inside the soul. And when a woman who once walked barefoot through the alleys of rejection finally rises, her victory does not shine like borrowed light. It glows from within, lit by every wound she refused to let define her. For Amina, the empire she began to build did not come from privilege. It rose from ashes the world once expected her to choke on. With her first investor standing firmly behind her vision, the momentum of Amina's dream shifted from fragile idea to structured expansion. What began as a humble collection of handcrafted items grew into a cooperative network that stretched across nearby towns. Women who had once been overlooked, widows, abandoned wives, young girls with no support, mothers struggling to survive, began finding purpose in Amina's growing venture. She traveled from community to community, seeking out artisans whose skills had been buried beneath hardship. She met women weaving baskets by dim lanterns, women dyeing cloth with methods passed down through generations, women crafting jewelry from natural materials with breathtaking precision. And each time she found them, she offered something no one else ever had: partnership, dignity, and the promise of a future shaped by their own hands. Under her guidance, small clusters of these artisans evolved into structured working groups. She created training centers, modest buildings at first, then larger spaces supported by investors, where women learned not only craft techniques but financial literacy, negotiation skills, record-keeping, and product development. She taught them pricing strategies, market adaptation, long-term planning. She encouraged collaboration instead of competition, building networks where each woman's success strengthened the rest. "We rise by lifting each other," she would say, and they believed her because she embodied those words in every action. As the cooperative expanded, so did its influence. Amina's name began to ripple across towns, reaching places she had once only read about in old magazines. Traders spoke of her with admiration. Community leaders invited her to speak at gatherings. Women carried her story like a torch, proof that transformation was not reserved for the privileged. For many, she became more than a businesswoman. She became a symbol of possibility, a reminder that dignity could be reclaimed even after the world tried to erase it. Her products found their way into city stores, cultural fairs, and regional exhibitions. Buyers marveled at the craftsmanship, unaware that each item carried a deeper story: threads of survival woven into every pattern, memories etched into every bead, resilience shaped into every curve of carved wood. The cooperative soon had steady income, growing membership, and increasing recognition. Investors who once doubted her now sought meetings. Journalists requested interviews. Youth groups invited her for mentorship sessions. And through it all, Amina remained grounded, walking with the same humility she carried when she used to sleep in a storage room, unsure of her next meal. But power did not change her. It clarified her. She understood responsibility not as an entitlement, but as a duty. And she made decisions with the deliberate calm of someone who knew what it meant to be powerless. She distributed profits fairly, ensured healthcare support for the women, created child-friendly workspaces, and established emergency funds for families in crisis. Her leadership was not loud. It was consistent, compassionate, firm where it needed to be, gentle where it mattered most. And because of this, the women trusted her, deeply, wholeheartedly. Yet even as her empire took shape, as her influence blossomed beyond anything she had once imagined possible, Amina carried within her a quiet understanding. Life never allows a rise without testing its foundation. Success had brought her visibility, and visibility drew attention, both good and bad. With growth came challenges she had not expected: supply delays, regional competition, scrutiny from officials who doubted a young woman's capacity to run large operations, and pressure from investors eager for rapid expansion. But these obstacles, though frustrating, were manageable. They were part of the natural landscape of leadership. What she had not anticipated was the shadow creeping from the past she thought she had buried long ago. It began subtly. Whispers from traders who had seen unfamiliar faces asking about her origins, rumors drifting from markets she had never visited, questions about the mansion she had once worked in. Someone, somewhere, was searching for her. Someone who knew fragments of her old life. Someone whose interest did not feel accidental. The first time she heard her former employer's name mentioned in a conversation between two traders, her heart froze for a brief, trembling second. Memories flashed. Accusations. Humiliation. The gate closing behind her like a final blow. She reminded herself she had changed, risen, transformed. She was no longer that frightened girl. And yet, something inside her stirred with unease. And as she prepared for a major regional launch, her biggest milestone yet, an unexpected message arrived, carrying a familiar name she hoped never to hear again. The past she thought she had left behind was rising, steady and deliberate, demanding to reopen a chapter she had never truly closed. Sometimes the most profound victory is not the applause earned from the world, but the quiet strength that allows you to walk, unshaken, back into the place where your tears once fell unnoticed. And when a woman returns to the ground that tried to bury her, not with anger, not with revenge, but with a calm woven from endurance and grace, the earth itself recognizes the shift. For Amina, stepping back into the mansion's compound felt less like confrontation and more like reclaiming a piece of her spirit she had unknowingly left behind. The invitation had arrived unexpectedly, delivered through a courier whose expression revealed nothing. It was a formal request from the very family that had once accused her, condemned her, and thrown her onto the street without hesitation. They now wished to discuss a partnership, an opportunity for their company to collaborate with her growing enterprise. At first, Amina thought it must be a mistake, yet the signature at the bottom removed all doubt, the Madame herself. For a moment, the weight of memory pressed against her heart, urging her to refuse, to protect her peace. But something quieter, steadier, more grounded called to her. Not revenge, not pride, closure. When she arrived at the mansion, the grand gate stood exactly as she remembered, tall, polished, cold. But this time, it swung open for her. No one barked orders at her. No one questioned her presence. The guard who once ignored her existence now offered a respectful nod before leading her inside. The same marble tiles that had echoed with mockery beneath the children's laughter now reflected her confident steps. The walls, once intimidating, now felt smaller than the strength she carried within her. The family assembled in the sitting room, their faces arranged in a fragile balance between discomfort and disbelief. The madam looked older, her sharpness dulled by time, and perhaps by the realization that the girl she once dismissed had risen into a woman the world now followed. The children, no longer children, shifted awkwardly, their eyes tracing the woman they had once mocked, now dressed in quiet elegance, carrying the presence of someone who had built herself from the ground up. Amina greeted them with calm courtesy. No bitterness, no accusation. Her voice held a gentleness they had never offered her, a steadiness that made the room feel smaller. She was not here to seek validation. She had outgrown that need. She had come with grace, because grace was the crown she had earned through fire. The madam cleared her throat, struggling to maintain composure. She began speaking about the potential partnership, about their desire to support women-led enterprises, about how impressed they were with Amina's rising influence. But beneath her carefully chosen words lay an unspoken truth. They needed Amina more than she needed them. The roles had reversed so quietly, so completely, that the air trembled with the irony of it. Amina listened with respectful silence, her expression soft but unreadable. When the madam finished, she thanked them for considering her work, then spoke about her mission: dignity, fairness, empowerment. Her words were calm, deliberate, shaped from the years she spent carving purpose out of pain. In that room, where once she had felt smaller than dust, she now spoke as though the entire world stood behind her. And in many ways, it did. Not once did she mention the false accusation. Not once did she recall the morning they had thrown her out. She did not need to. Her dignity carried its own power, louder than any confrontation. And that, more than anything, unsettled them. They had expected defensiveness, or bitterness, or pride. Instead, they met a woman who had mastered herself so completely that their past cruelty no longer held the power to move her. Yet as the conversation reached a natural pause, Amina felt a responsibility, not to shame them, but to set the truth free. Because true healing required air, and some truths must be spoken not for revenge, but for release. She reached into her file and gently placed a document on the table. The madam frowned, recognizing it instantly. The missing bracelet report filed the day Amina was expelled. Amina spoke softly, her tone without accusation. She explained that the item had been recovered months after her dismissal, misplaced by one of the older servants who had since confessed. She showed the record, the verification, the exact date it had been found. The room froze. Amina did not ask for an apology. She did not demand remorse. She simply said, "I wanted you to know the truth, not for my sake, but so you understand the value of seeing people clearly before deciding who they are." The room fell into a silence so deep it seemed to swallow the walls themselves. And as the weight of her words settled like a quiet storm over the family, Amina felt another truth rising within her. One final revelation she had not yet spoken, one that would silence every remaining doubt in the room and reshape the way they remembered her forever. True queens are not crowned by ceremony or applause. They rise because they refuse to stop climbing, even when the world insists they remain on their knees. And when a woman finally stands at the summit, she carved with her own wounded hands. The crown she wears is not made of gold. It is made of every tear, every lesson, every quiet victory she fought for in the dark. For Amina, the day she became the queen of her own story did not feel like triumph. It felt like truth finally speaking without fear. The event was held in a wide-open courtyard of the Regional Cultural Center, the kind of place built to honor stories, heritage, and voices long overlooked. Banners bearing the name of Amina's cooperative fluttered gently in the breeze, their colors mirrored in the vibrant fabrics worn by the hundreds of women gathered. They had come from towns, villages, and cities, mothers, daughters, widows, apprentices, artisans, each carrying her own private battles, each hoping to catch a glimpse of the woman whose journey had begun in silence and now echoed across the region like a call to rise. When Amina stepped onto the platform, a hush settled over the crowd. Not the forced silence of fear or expectation, but the reverent quiet of people witnessing hope personified. She stood tall, wrapped in a simple yet elegant cloth, woven by one of the very women she had helped uplift. Her posture carried the weight of years spent fighting invisibility. Her face held the calm of someone who had learned to survive storms without bitterness. And when she touched the microphone, her fingers trembled not from fear, but from the overwhelming realization that her life had come full circle. "I was once a girl who believed her story did not belong in any room," she began, her voice steady but soft enough to draw the audience closer. A girl who spoke quietly because the world told her she had nothing of value to say. She paused, letting the weight of the truth breathe through the crowd. Faces leaned forward, eyes glistened. Young girls clutched their notebooks. Older women nodded, recognizing pieces of their own histories tucked into her words. She spoke about the mansion, the silence, the mockery, the wrongful accusation. She spoke about the night she was thrown into the street with nothing but a plastic bag and a wounded heart. Yet she told it with grace, not bitterness, weaving the pain into a narrative of resilience rather than revenge. The audience listened with growing awe, witnessing how she transformed the cruelty of her past into the foundation of her strength. Then she spoke of Mama Sad, the market stall, the old magazines, the nights studying under a flickering lantern. She shared the story of Ibrahim, the mentoring, the failures, the strategies, the first investor who dared to believe. She explained how knowledge had become her weapon, how dignity had become her mission, how sisterhood had become the backbone of her empire. And as she spoke, women wiped tears, some quietly gripping each other's hands as though claiming a shared victory. Her voice grew firmer as she described the birth of her cooperative, the training centers, the employment networks, the workshops where forgotten women rediscovered their power. She spoke of the villages transformed, of children now attending school, of families lifted from despair, of entire communities reshaped by the confidence and creativity of women who had once been silenced. Her words rose like a tide, steady and unstoppable, carrying with them the truth that her empire had never been about wealth. It had always been about worth. She paused, taking in the sight before her. Hundreds of faces illuminated by belief, by pride, by the quiet realization that transformation was possible for them too. She felt the weight of her past loosen, every tear shed in the mansion, every humiliation endured, every moment she doubted herself, melting into something beautiful. Purpose. "I do not stand here as someone who had an easy path," she continued softly. "I stand here as proof that even the smallest voice can grow loud enough to reshape a destiny. Not because the world gave me permission, but because I refused to stop climbing." The crowd erupted into applause, fierce, emotional, unrestrained. It wasn't the applause that crowned her. It was the recognition, the understanding, the connection. In that moment, Amina understood she had stepped fully into the life she once only dreamed of. She was no longer defined by hardship. She was defined by what she built from it. Her cooperative was expanding into new regions. Her leadership was being studied by young entrepreneurs. Her impact was shaping policies, guiding programs, inspiring initiatives. But none of these things mattered as deeply as the sight before her now. The girls, the women, the mothers, the daughters, all seeing themselves reflected in her journey, all realizing they too could rise. As the applause softened, Amina's eyes drifted across the audience, lingering on the faces of the youngest girls, those who sat on the ground, knees hugged to their chests, eyes wide, breaths held. She wondered how many of them were carrying secrets, wounds, or dreams waiting for permission to exist. She wondered which of them would rise from quiet suffering to claim her own crown. And somewhere in that listening crowd, hidden between shadows and hope, Amina saw a young girl watching her, with the same mixture of trembling fear and rising fire she once carried, making her wonder who among them was quietly preparing to become the next queen of her own story. If Amina's journey touched your heart, then stay close. This channel is where stories of strength, healing, and quiet triumph continue to rise. Every week, new tales unfold, reminding us that even the smallest voice can spark a revolution inside someone's soul. So like, subscribe, and share this story with anyone who needs a reminder that destiny can be rewritten. Your support keeps these powerful African stories alive, and you are now a part of the journey. Stay with us, because the next story might be the one that awakens something in you.